Hello, hello, and welcome to Tea with Halo, the podcast of the Enchanted Academy. And today we have tea with Lucya Starza, who is a fellow Moon Books author and a witch living on the same island as me, which is quite fun. Um, so I'm Halo Quinn. If you don't know me, I am a pagan author, a storyteller, and a witch, and I teach modern witchcraft and magic. So as a teacher of witchcraft and magic, I'm really curious about both how people go about learning it and about how other people go about teaching it and teaching those skills. And the reason that I teach and the reason that I share and that I write and that I talk about it and that I tell stories is because I believe that the world is enchanted. It is alive with spirits. And in our modern day culture, we forget this so often. So this is why we are here today, is to have a cup of tea or drink of choice with our guests and to hear about learning, teaching, exploring magic, and re-enchanting our lives and our world. So today, Lucya Starza, I would love you to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? And welcome.
Well, thank you for having me on the podcast. Okay, yes, I'm a witch. I live in London. Um, I live in a house in London that my has been in my family for a few years. I've got a pair of cats. I've got a husband. Um, and yes, my background in kind of magic actually goes back to when I was very young. I mean, my grandma was an astrologer, and my kind of family were quite into. Um, I think they probably have called themselves more new age. Like my dad was really into dowsing and going UFO spotting. So I, I come from a slightly weird family. So yeah, my interest in magic goes back a long way. But I when I was in my 20s, I trained in Gardnerian Wicca. So I'm a second degree Gardnerian high priestess. But these days I'm really eclectic, and I very much like to draw on folk magic practices, and I also attend a druid group. So I'm really very eclectic.
That's really cool. I love, so for me, there's something really fascinating about where all of these different pieces, because people describe them as entirely different things, where they actually all feed into each other. They share roots, they overlap. And I mean, for me, there's a commonality in the common goal in there and the path that we're walking, all going towards the same place. So what is it that you find in piecing together these eclectic paths, as you say? Like, where do they all come together for you? Where do you see that those merging, those blending?
I think that you over I think that it can be really good when you're just starting out to get a solid grounding, to like perhaps train in a specific tradition, learn a specific way. But I think that as you get more experienced, I think you learn to kind of feel where the strands of magic are, which is why I really, really value my quite, you know, my training in Gardnerian Wicca, which was where I had to like go along to a coven one night a week for a year and a day and learn all sorts of different things and learn very quite specific ways of doing things. But these days, in my personal practice, no, I'm very more intuitive. If I'm going to do a ritual, even, I'm far more likely to sort of want to go out for a walk first and sense what's happening in nature and perhaps collect some things that are in bloom and put them on the altar. And although I might cast a circle, I'm not going to be particularly rigid about it. And I'll introduce whatever feels right. And if I'm doing a spell, I'll often kind of go around the house and think, oh, that'll be appropriate for the spell, or this will be appropriate for the spell. And so I'm kind of using my intuition a lot. And in my classes, I kind of try to teach both. So, for example, when I teach candle magic, I will talk about what different colors of candles mean in um, the Western esoteric tradition, the planetary colors. So like, oh yes, like red for Mars or for passion. I mean, that's actually quite a good thing because in traditional planetary magic, Venus is associated with green. And a lot of people nowadays would say, I can't do a love spell that's with a green candle, it doesn't feel right. And so they'd use a red spell because that feels right. But red, of course, is more traditionally associated with Mars, which is like, for courage and battles and stuff like that. And so I kind of teach both ways. I get them to like intuitively feel what color candle is going to be good for what they want to do. But I will also say, well, traditionally, these are what you can do. And you can mix and match. So, like, you could have a lovely red candle, but you could have some nice green foliage on the altar. And so that's kind of how I mix and match and teach mixing and matching.
I really love that because it's that piece of Mars being that kind of like courage and there is an aspect of love which is very martial, right? There's that like the lust and the diving into things. And there's that moment, I think we one day a lot of people associate pink with it, which of course
Mm,
is a form of red,
yeah, yeah,
right? And so now we've begun to associate pink with Venus. And at that
yeah,
point, you go, oh, isn't that interesting how this
yeah,
form of a martial color has ended up with.
yeah. Yeah, because traditionally little boys were dressed in pink because pink was seen as like a soft red. And it was only really in the kind of the 18th century when pink became a fashionable color for decorating things. And it became gradually more associated with like femininity and romance and things like that. And I mean, at one time in perhaps medieval paintings, if young lovers were being depicted, you'd see them dressed in green. It was
Mm,
it was the color of it was the color of that was far more associated with that. But yes, it and little girls were traditionally dressed in pale blue because it's the color of the Virgin Mary. And so color symbolism and how it and culturally different cultures in some countries white is the color of mourning, whereas in England you're more likely to wear black. So yes, cultural significance, personal significance, um, popular culture significance, they're all so important.
mm. So there's this piece in there, isn't there, about, and this might be a tricky question to, certainly it's a big topic, is how much of the magical correspondences and the magical tools and the material that we use, how much of those is about our relationship and our psychology and symbolism in it and our cultural symbolism, and how much of it is about the actual energy those materials
Mhm.
use and hold in themselves. If you're coming at it from an animist perspective,
Mhm.
where those materials are beings and spirits with their own personalities, like where do you see that flow between that psychology, symbolism, and spirit?
Mm. Well, if I must admit, I have not done an exercise where everyone in my class talks to the spirit of the candle they're about to set light to. Um, maybe we should. Um, but yes, I mean, I had a very, I mean, this is a little weird, but I had a very strange experience once when I was really tired. I'd traveled home from a festival. It was late at night. I was really, really tired. And I went to my local curry house to get a takeaway curry. And I'd been at a magical festival, so I was a little bit in that headspace and I was like quite out of it with tiredness. And I found myself, I'm not visually, no one could see me doing, not verbally, but communicating with the spirit of the counter in the shop, which is like so weird. But it was like, hello, I'm so pleased to see you again. I'm really glad you're having a curry. And I'm sorry, that might sound like a terrible accent, and I hope no one's offended by that. But this was kind of how the spirit was talking. It was so pleased to be the counter in the shop. That sounds really weird, doesn't it? That sounds so weird.
That sounds like so real, so real. we forget. I think we forget so often that the world is full of spirits and all of these beings are alive. And we get so used to having our blinkers on and thinking in this materialistic manner, or in when we encounter magic. I know when I started out in magic, I was quite skeptical. I was a very skeptical child. And so I was like, yeah, but it could be all in my head. So I went at it, well, if it's just psychological, let's explore that and see what happens. And it then opened these doorways to go, oh, actually the experience is that of meeting other beings, of meeting the being of the counter, which, and if everything in the world has some kind of being, when we get into the
Mm.
right space, like you're gonna
Mm.
communicate with it. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, when I walk from my local park, I'm the trees there are my friends. I know what they're like, and I will be like silently saying hello to them. And yeah, my husband sort of said, I said, oh, I know I did. He was asking me, he said, well, do you talk to trees? I said, well, yeah, I'll say hello to the trees in the local park. He says, do they talk back to you? Well, yes. He was like, oh.
So when you're meeting these beings, right, when you're talking to the trees and they're talking back, okay, how do they talk back to you? How do you experience that?
Well, I mean, it's kind of a feeling. Yeah, it's very much a yeah. I mean, I don't hear it as words. It's not like that. It's more a kind of a sort of and I suppose a kind of a kind of well, like when I was talking with the counter, it's more, you're not doing anything. You're kind of just sensing this conversation. And yeah, you're right. It could just be all in my head. I could be imagining it. I've got no evidence otherwise. It feels quite real to me.
Oh, I didn't mean to suggest that it was like the my approach with it has always been to take a scientific approach, right? And to go, well, it could be this, or it could be all in my head, or it could be that these spirits are really real and that the millennia of human history and all of the other human cultures that have gone, no, the world is full of spirits. Maybe they are all right, and it's just us that are the weird outliers in this moment in
Yeah.
time. And
Yeah, I think we cut
see what
ourselves
happens.
off from that kind of yeah, we're so brought up that if a little child talks to their invisible friend, that's fine. But if you're still doing it when you're an adult, they think you're a little bit strange. Or
Yeah.
they think you're a witch. But I know my friends just think I'm weird, and all the ones who are skeptical are like, yeah, well, that's just Lucy. She's a bit weird. And I don't, I think I'm old enough that I don't really care.
Mhm. Well, I've always come back to the thing of it's that question, is it rational to believe in what we call the irrational? I'm like, well, it makes my life better when I approach the world as if it is alive. And my experience of life is better when I interact with these beings as spirits, as real. So if my experience and my life is improved by this, then it's
Yeah,
perfectly rational.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, sometimes it's like the communication is quite practical. I mean, I remember once I had a computer that was going really badly wrong, and I wanted to get a file off it, and it just stopped working. And I just asked the computer very nicely, please just come back to life again long enough for me to get this file. And it did, just long enough for me to get the file. And I thought, well, that could have been coincidence, but I got the file.
Right? And when enough coincidences build up, or possibly coincidences, you start to go, okay, maybe these are synchronicities, and maybe there's something to it, and whatever it is that's happening, my life has improved, and my computer seems to be happy to give me the file. So win-win. Oh, I absolutely love that. So, what is like fundamental to your practice now that you can talk about? Like,
I
because sometimes
think
there are parts of our practice that we would like that are more personal. So what are the pieces that what's something that's fundamental to your practice now that you're happy to share?
I think for me it's very much being in touch with the the seasons and the wheel of the year. I mean, one of my books is I can show it here actually. Pagan Portals rounding the wheel of the year, because I, although I'm really happy to celebrate the 8 festivals of the wheel of the year, for me, I over time I very much see the wheel of the year as being far more rounded, and it's far more getting in touch with the energy of each day, or each week or each month. And in my book I go through what's happening each month, and so it's very much getting outside, seeing what's happening in nature. And people would say, oh, you live in London, there aren't any green spaces, there aren't any trees. It's London is one of the greenest cities. We've got loads of parks. I mean, I'm lucky, I've got a garden, but I live right on the edge of Crystal Palace Park, which is it's just lovely. Um, on Saturday, I walked 4 miles to Hillyfield Stone Circle in Lewisham, and people say London doesn't have a stone circle. Well, we don't have ancient stone circles. We have a few recent ones. This one was built for the millennium, and it was a lovely walk. And as I was walking along, even though I was walking to a nice park, Hilly Fields, but along the way, I was seeing blossom on the trees in people's gardens, and there is just you don't necessarily have to be outside in the wilds of the countryside to see trees coming to life, to see flowers, to see plants, or even to grow vegetables. I mean, if you've got a little bit of a garden, you can grow some vegetables.
I always say to people, they're like, oh, there's no nature
Oh,
where I live. And I just go, well, look up, step outside, breathe in, feel the wind on your skin, and look up. What's the sky doing? Look at the cracks in the pavement. Where are there weeds?
yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing, of course, is, and London is an amazing example of this. If you start to pay attention to the movement of the people and
Mm.
the colors that people are wearing changes with the season, the amount of clothing people wear is really obvious somewhere crowded like London, but it's everywhere. The flow and the pattern of people changes.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I'm quite into psychogeography, which is kind of exploring urban places and getting in touch with the kind of um, the energy of the urban environment. So, and that part of that is, yes, watching the flow of people, the behavior of people, but also tapping into the kind of the psychic flows and the magical energetic flows, feeling the earth. I mean, the people who kind of started psychogeography, the situationists, they used to say beneath the paves, the sand. So it was like the sand, the beach, the sand, the natural soil is beneath the pavement. And you can, I mean, like London has so many layers. I mean, there are so many archaeological sites that you can go to, and you can actually see the different layers. There's a lot of human history, but there is also, I mean, the houses in London, a lot of them are built from London clay. They're built from the land. Um, and some of there's I've forgotten which place it is, but there's a place up in London where the the stone, you can actually see in it the remains of the fossils of the sea creatures um uh that formed this sedimentary rock, this sedimentary stone, and people take rubbings of them, the different sea creatures. So yes, I mean, it's a brick is still, it still holds a bit of that nature. It still holds that London clay, and that London clay was once living sea creatures.
Oh, that is such a powerfully important reminder that the things that we think of as not being part of nature are still part of nature. And I mean, the shapes of cities, they grow up based in that landscape. Like we shape the landscape
Mm.
quite a lot, but we start out by growing around water sources, around ports, around like high places for easy defense, depending. So different things of humanity and our civilizations, our buildings, we build those things around and through nature, so they're all grown out of that space. Now I really want to know where the rocks with the fossils and things are, and I have to
Yeah.
look that up. And
Yeah, it's somewhere where in the summer they have some outdoor performances. I know that, but I've forgotten exactly where it is. Um, yeah, I need to find that out as well and go there again.
we'll have to, well, when you look it up, we'll put it in the description for this episode, because that'd be very cool for people to be able to look up, and of course to find similar things in their own spaces, in their own
Mm,
cities and towns, or like obviously those that live in the countryside can go out in the countryside, but even there you can see the way in which humanity has interacted with the landscape and the
mm,
ancient furrows. And yeah, oh, that's really, I really love that. A lot of what I feel is important about witchcraft and magic and a foundation of enchantment is remembering relationship,
mm.
and remembering our relationship to the spirits, but also our relationship to the land and the physical world, and as part of that web of nature.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Yeah, the web of life and how everything is connected. Yes.
Yeah. So for you, what is it that makes someone a witch? Why is it that that's a term you use for yourself?
Well, I think there's many different definitions, and honestly, I would say that if someone wants to identify as a witch, then fair enough. Um, I mean, generally speaking, one would think that you are probably someone who does some magic, um, or is, I mean, yeah, I do know some like pagan witches who actually, some Wiccans especially, who actually don't really do very many spells. They might know how to do them, but they don't. For them, it's all about celebrating the god and the goddess, and that, I mean, that's also fine. I mean, that, that's, it's like there are many different definitions of witch, and probably at one time when I was very much into Gardnerian Wicca, I didn't really do very many spells. I mean, I was taught how to do spells, but it was, for me, it was far more about coming together at the solstices and the Esbats, um, and celebrating the cycle of the year, the cycle of the moon, and that kind of thing in a very like spiritual way. And I do still do that, but I'm far more these days, it's far more being in tune with nature and using the forces of nature. And in fact, if historically back in, medieval times, things like planetary magic using, like we talked about earlier, using the colors associated with different planets for spellwork was called natural magic. In the three books of occult philosophy, that is natural magic. The idea that um, the different plants, the different crystals, the different animals um, kind of soaked up different types of energy, so that one plant would be a plant of Mars, one plant would be a plant of the sun, one plant would be a plant of the moon, and so on. Um, and that was called natural magic. And I think that although a lot of people say, "Oh, that's very traditional magic. That's grimoire magic. That's not really natural." It sort of is. And although obviously science has moved on, and we don't really think that different plants soak up specific energy from different planets, they nevertheless, there's still something there. And whether that energy is one of long tradition and association, because I think that also has an energy, or whether it was more that those plants really do have that energy and it got associated with the planets for the other way round reason, if in a way. I don't know, but yes, I suppose I'm very much into natural magic.
I love that. And I love what you're saying about people like, oh, that's the grimoire tradition. That's like all very ceremonial. Because when I first found my way into magic and paganism, like that was the story that was spun around it, is that these are separate things. But as I went along my journey, And as now we've got some more people doing research on those overlaps, and we're back to those points of integration, aren't we? I was discovering, well, actually, no, the cunning folk, they were working from grimoires. They would have
Mm.
like spells that you would find in those old grimoires. They might have some of the pentacles from the Key of Solomon, or and they might be doing practices and rituals. And then when we get into more modern magic, well, of course, Wicca has very strong roots in the ceremonial traditions and has continued to use those things because they work. And that then came into paganism. So the things that we think of as being very pagan, well, they have strong roots in the
Yeah.
ceremonial and the
Mm.
grimoire traditions.
Oh yeah.
There's
Yeah.
no real separation.
Yeah. 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 I mean, one thing that is very different today is like weasels got a tough time back in medieval magic. I was thinking about weasels because, like, when I was reading the three books of occult philosophy, it was like, and you get a weasel and you remove its whatever, and then you use it. It's like, yeah, no, I mean, nowadays we're very much more in you be kind to animals. I mean, I'm vegetarian. I'm not going to be cutting up a weasel or any animal. But nevertheless, you can still use the symbolism of the weasel. You can use like an oracle card with a weasel on it and put it on your altar.
Yeah, and bring that thread of tradition into that space. I was reading just yesterday, in fact, a little piece about some notes on the True Grimoire, and in that there is some quite detailed description of how to make parchment from the skin of a goat. And so you've got step by step instructions for how you start with slaying the goat and then preparing the skin. And then right at the very end, in the traditional book, there is or you can use virgin paper, right? And one of the things that the commentator, Jake Stratton Kent, in fact, it was the note in there, said was, well, at the point at which that grimoire was written, it would have been common practice. It would have been perfectly normal for those people at that time using that grimoire to go and slay a goat for food.
Yeah.
So this is just a process that they were really used to. For us now, if we were to go and do something like that, for many of us, it would be a hugely traumatic experience where we wouldn't really know what we were doing, and the poor goat would be terrified, and like there's all of these things
Mm.
it would just be a nightmare, and that's
Yeah,
not what we want to be putting in our magic.
absolutely.
So things change over time. So how do we then bring those traditions through? And I love what you say about like a weasel oracle card on your altar, or a mole instead of a picture of a mole for that reminder. So when you started out in your practice, and I know you said you were brought up in a kind of new agey, magically inclined environment, right? But when you started actually looking at consciously learning magic and consciously learning to practice your craft, where did you start with that, and what do you wish you'd known at that point?
Well, as I said, I kind of grew up with it. I mean, my dad taught me to dowse. My dad, um, I think the first books on how to do magic, my dad bought for me, and he would have carefully curated them because I remember the first book that he read that I read that he had bought me on how to do magic was, well, you have to be a virgin and celibate and a vegetarian, and all all he carefully curated the books that I read. I mean, he bought me books on palm reading, and so I and I think what I actually wish is that I had learnt more from my family
Mm.
because although I got very into dowsing, but as I said, my grandma was an astrologer, and I found that very interesting, but I never got her to teach me how to do it. I mean, back then it was even before calculators, so she was using log tables and things like that, very complicated. And she was quite elderly, and she died when I was in my teens. Uh, and by that stage, I was far more interested in pop music and, being with my friends than doing magic. I got into it more again later when I was in my 20s. My teens were not an era when I did that. I was out campaigning environmentally when I was in my teens, marching to save the whale and doing canal clearing with Friends of the Earth and things like that. But yes, I do wish that I had learned more from my family. I wish my grandma had. I wish I'd said to my grandma, "No, please teach me how to cast a birth chart, how to read what's going to happen." Um, and so yes, I think that is my what I should have done.
Yeah, that resonates quite a lot with me, because when I started and I got my first tarot deck, um, the one thing that I didn't do and I could have done was ask my mum to teach me how to read the cards, because she read, but she never thought to offer, because by the time like I was showing an interest, she kind of assumed I already knew what I was doing. So she never thought to offer, and I never thought to ask. It was just something that was around. And so I've gotten to this point. I'm like, well, I've been reading cards for years, but I could have actually learned it from my mother. How cool would
Yeah,
that have been?
yeah,
And I don't know about you, but there were so many opportunities as I was like growing up and in the early years of doing this, where there were people around who knew what was going on, who knew how to do things, who had vast stores of knowledge and wisdom and practices. And I didn't know what to ask. So I just didn't. I was just like, oh, that's cool. And then I'd go off and play with my friends and read the books. So yeah, there's that piece I think that we forget. And I think that every generation does this. We
mm,
kind of forget how much wisdom and knowledge that other people have that they'd be willing to share with us if we just
yeah,
asked.
yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, no, yeah, I agree. I think that I think when we're young, especially when we're in our teens, we're in a phase where we want to reject the stuff that our parents did.
Yeah, I think that's true. Or like other people that you encounter around as well, because of course not everyone grows up with parents that are doing things. But
Mm,
I think every set of parents has something. Um,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
grandparents and like family.
yeah,
So when you are teaching your classes, because I know you teach quite a lot of like practical magic and spell crafting classes and things, how do you go about uh, starting to share with people the experience of magic, like what they're looking for? You mentioned like intuitive and feeling the threads of magic. How do you
yeah.
go about sharing with people how to feel that, how to listen to the trees, if they don't feel like they've ever experienced that before?
Okay. Well, one thing one thing that can be done, one thing that I do teach, I've got a class coming up, it's actually this weekend, which will be a long while ago when this comes out, um, which is actually on cleansing and clearing. And one of the things I talk about is deciding whether you want to keep an object, whether what you want to do with an object. And I get everyone to take an object out of their handbag or out of their pocket. It can be anything, a comb or a diary or, whatever. And I get them to first of all think, okay, how do I feel about this object immediately? And then I get them to spend a little time sensing the energy of the object, to sort of hold their hands above it and just be quiet with the object. And how does it feel? How, what readings are they getting off it? Do they, how does it, using all their senses, which can be smell. You could taste the object. I suppose it depends what it is. If what you're pulling out of your bag is a bar of chocolate or something, but you could sniff the object. But more than anything, just to hold their hands above it for a while and close their eyes and get an impression of the energy of the object, and then afterwards to say, okay. How have your feelings, are your feelings different about that object now? Is that object something you want to keep? Is it an object that you want to get rid of? And I suggest that as a way of, if you're doing a decluttering, and there's a lot, it's a time of spring cleaning, people are doing a lot of decluttering is a big thing people do. But one way, if you're a witch or if you're into magical things, is to sense the energy of the object. Does that object just need a little bit of TLC? Does it need cleaning? Does it need a lick of paint? Does it need a bit of mending? How do you feel about that object? Not, oh, well, if I haven't used this object in 6 months, it's going in the bin, which I really am not in favor of. So I suppose that is one exercise that people can really easily do.
You reminded me, actually, mentioning the tasting the chocolate, of a, as a slight tangent, um, of a creative writing exercise that I did as part of a school trip when I was about 13. So it was many, many years ago. It's stuck in my mind. And what we did was we each picked a chocolate, and we had to like take a moment and really take our time with each stage, like the visuals of how it was wrapped up and the colors, and then really feel into and notice what was arising in us when we unwrapped it, and the smell, and then how it looked, and how it, like the sound of the wrapper, and all of those different, engaging all of our senses, and then the taste, and taking that time to interact with it, and then writing a piece of poetry with all of those sensory pieces. And so I find that overlap between creativity and inspiration and sensing and paying attention to the subtleties and the magic in the world has this really strong connection. And there's a really strong overlap. So that's my way of segueing into something that I wanted to ask you about, which is, you've written a novel that has also
Yeah,
come out through Moon Books called Erosion.
yeah.
So I'd love to hear about that. And what I'd most like to hear about it is, how has that, like the process of writing that novel or the pieces within it, where's the magic in that for you?
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I'll show the
Yeah.
cover.
Tell
Um.
tell people what it's about, and then
Okay.
get
Well,
their stuff.
it's set in 1987, in the year of the Great Storm, and it's a group of young people who are living in the Kentish on a town in the Kentish coast, and the basics of the story are that they discover an ancient grave on a cliff edge, and for various reasons, rather than contact the police, which you're supposed to do if you find human remains, however old they might be, they decide to do a seance to contact the spirit of the skull. And that is the premise of the book, but it's not really, it's gothic, it's contemporary gothic rather than being horror or so much urban fantasy. Um, it's everything that happens in the book could have a magical supernatural explanation, but it could also potentially be coincidence, imagination. They start to work with the spirit in the skull, who they name Rosmorta, who they are in their seance. They the name Rosmorta is spelled out, and um they start to do magic. They start to ask Rosmorta's help with things. Um, and things sometimes go very wrong. Um, it, as I say, it has horror elements, but I've had people say, "Oh, I don't want to read it because it's um it's a horror book. I don't read horror." It's like, well, it's gothic more than horror, but For me, there's a lot of the way I experience real magic in it. Um, so it's not about throwing around fireballs or things like that. It's very much about feeling subtle changes happen. Um, and um, a, I mean, I've written about candle magic in my other books. I've written about poppets. These come into it too. Um, for me, it's a sort of coming of age story. I mean, the people are in their 20s, so they're not kids, they're not teenagers. But it's kind of a coming of age, and but it's a coming of age in a kind of a magical sense. It's learning about magic because they have one of the group knows something about magic. Her grandmother was a spiritualist, so she knows something about magic, um, but probably not as much as say you or I do. And so they sort of have a guru who they trust, but she knows that she's just really feeling the way, and she has more confidence than she probably really should. It's yeah, I mean it's not a book like The Craft or something like that. It's not like that. Um and and a lot of people like about it is so the characters feel really believable. And I actually wrote the book when we were in lockdown because I was stuck in my house, but I wanted to escape in my imagination. And I wanted to escape to a time long ago, long before lockdowns, before the pandemic. So in a way, I was escaping to my own youth when I did live on the Kent coast um, for a few years. And so there is a lot of real knowledge of what it's like on the Kent coast and of living in a seaside town and of that era in a way of the 1980s. So there's quite a bit of nostalgia of the 1980s. I don't know whether that really answers your question. I've probably gone into far too much depth.
Well, so it sounds to me like there's this thread in there about how magic feels and what that
Yes.
experience of encountering magic is, and that kind of journey stepping into it, and some of the pitfalls, and some of the one of the pitfalls, of course, being overconfidence and arrogance, right? And that is a really important piece to find, which is difficult to find in non-fiction books. This is one of the places where I think creative writing and fiction really comes into its own,
Yeah.
because you get to step into a character's experience. And when the author, like yourself, knows what those things feel like and they can express it through those characters, you can step into that and get a sense of what magic feels like and what that experience and those encounters can feel like, all while having an adventure with skulls and seances and storms. And my goodness, that sounds so cool, because if I found a skull it, that had emerged from the storm, I would absolutely be doing a seance with it.
This is what every witch says. I said, well, they found this skull, and rather than phoning the police, everyone says, well, of course they did. Of
Of
course
course,
they did.
why wouldn't you? And there are good reasons not to. And from a legal perspective, I have to recommend that actually, if you find human remains, you go and call the police first. Um, but as a 20-something-year-old witch, in fact, if I found one now, probably the first thing I'd do would be something seancey.
Yeah,
Then I'd phone the police and go, there might be
yeah,
a problem here. But so that's a really is a really important piece, and that actually brings a really important piece in there and into the conversation, and that is about how we communicate these experiences, which then allows people to recognize them in their own lives and recognize them in their own practice, and that role that fiction and poetics and creative modes of expression can actually be really important and really useful. And I like that you mention in there that the occurrences in the book could be magical or they could be coincidence. And it's like, well, yeah, we go back to the beginning of our conversation where we're like, I don't know 100% objectively if this is real or if it's all in my head. But what I do know is that it feels real. And when I engage with it as if it is real, and I treat those beings I'm encountering, the phenomena I'm encountering, the deities, the spirits, with respect as independent beings rather than imaginary friends, my life is enriched for it and is
Mm.
better for it. So I love that you bring that into your book, and I'm curious when I eventually have a reading phase when I'm on a train somewhere, probably, to see how that plays out in that particular story.
Oh, thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing about that. So we're coming to the end of our time, and I would like to invite you to share a practice that our listeners can go away and do, like right now when they finish their things, or this evening, or when they've got a bit of space, to share a practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the simplest spells to do, and the probably the spell that I do most often is a little candle magic spell, and you just need a little tea light. And I think that for anybody who is just starting out wanting to do magic for the first time, a candle spell is ideal because if you think about it, can we do kind of give candles a sort of they have an aura of magic. I mean, for a start, we blow candles out over a birthday cake and make a wish. But also the very fact that we still use candles, because in this day and age when we've got electric lights, we don't need to, but we do because they're really good at changing the atmosphere in a room. They will change an ordinary meal into a romantic dinner. They will turn your bathroom into a spa. They will make the atmosphere spooky if you want to tell a ghost story. And we're tapping into that kind of liminal kind of changeability that candlelight brings. But for a very, very simple candle spell, all you need to do is think about what something you want to wish for and then sum it up in one word. And the reason you sum it up in one word is because it's kind of condensing it down. You've probably got a big picture in your head about that something you really want. I'm in a new job or something, whatever. But you sum it up in one word. And then I've got some matches here. Um, with the end of a match, you scratch your word into the candle. Then I've got a little cauldron candle holder, but it doesn't have to be a cauldron candle holder. You can use any candle holder. Just pop your candle into it. And then you would light your match. And as you light the candle, you visualize your wish coming true. And I think that's quite an important thing. That's a kind of, a manifesting technique that you visualize your wish coming true. You visualize it actually happening, you being in that situation. If it's a new job, you visualize yourself doing that job, being in that job, or whatever it is you wish for. And then you don't have to sit and stare at it for all the time it takes a candle to burn down. Um, but you let that candle burn down, and as it burns down, your wishes are going out into the universe. One thing I also say is that I think a lot of people, once they've done a spell, they say, "Oh, what sign should I looking for, whether it will work or not?" Well, what I say is, don't fret about whether it's going to work or not. Do keep a magical journal. Write down the date you did your spell and what you wished for and how you did it and all that kind of thing. But just go about your everyday life. Go out, enjoy yourself, have good fun. Don't check back until, a few weeks later, a month later, something like that. And then you can look at your journal and see, okay, has that worked? But the way I liken keep checking on whether your spells worked, keep on thinking about it, It's rather like if you bake a cake, you bake your cake, you mix up your cake mixture, you put it into the cake tin, you put it into the oven. Putting it into the oven is kind of effectively the moment you're lighting your candle. And you don't keep opening the oven door to check whether the cake's cooking. You just trust that your cake's cooking, and at the right time, you open the oven and you've got a cake. And that's how I see spells working most effectively.
I really love that. Thank you. So they have it, folks, a simple spell that you can go and do now with probably things that you've got around your house and some of a tip for how to make sure that your spells are more effective and so you don't keep letting the heat out of the oven while your magical cake is baking. Just let it do its thing and it'll be ready when it's ready. That's really wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Lucya. Um,
Thank you.
yeah. So if people would like to come and learn more magic from you, check out your books, what have you got coming up next? Where can they find you?
Right. Okay. Well, I teach quite regular workshops at Treadwell's Bookshop in London, which is an amazing magical bookshop, and they do stock quite a lot of Moon books as well. But yes, on I've got a candle magic workshop coming up on the 22nd of March, I think. But if you go to Treadwell's Bookshop website, then you can look at their events that they've got coming up and book for one of those. Obviously, you kind of need to be in the London area to do that. I do also sometimes do online courses. Um, and if you go to my blog, which is a Bad Witches blog at www.badwitch.co.uk, I do have an events page which lists a lot of magical and pagan events in London, but also online things, and that will include my events as well. And some of the things I do are online, so you can do them wherever you are.
Perfect. So check out Lucya's novel Erosion and her other books on candle magic, puppets, rounding the wheel of the year. Go to Bad Witch. What was it? Badwitch
www.badwitch.co.uk.
.co.uk. Badwitch.co.uk. All of the links will be in the description for the episode. And thank you very much, Lucia. It was absolutely lovely to talk to you, to actually get to kind of meet you in person, as it were. And I hope next time I make it down to London, maybe we can cross paths. Um, so to my listeners, go away, do your candle spell, check out badwitch.co.uk. And if you would like to be involved in conversations around magic and enchantment, if you'd like to come and join a magical community with lots of different practitioners doing different things, check out the Enchanted Academy. You can find the link in the description below. This is the community I've set up with schools of magic, with courses, and with plenty of free events happening and lots of conversations around, well, all sorts of things from fairy magic and embodied magic through to practical witchcraft and practices. So do come along and join the conversation because magic and enchanting the world is a community effort. Thank you to everyone for tuning into Tea with Halo and Lucya Starza. If you enjoyed, like, comment, subscribe, hit all the buttons, and share this with someone who you think will find it interesting. Remember to light your candle and let us know how it goes. How do you get on with it? And what color candle do you use? Thank you so much. Thank you, Lucya. And we will see you back here in 2 weeks' time for another episode of Tea with Halo and my next guest.